It's interesting to have a wired mic that has a switch on it. It's a cute trick.
I don't know.
It's like Behringers.
It seems
They
like a
are
sensible
Behringers.
It kind of does, particularly for like a panel thing where you might pass the mic around a lot. But I'm mostly used to seeing that on wireless.
My biggest complaint with the stands is like it's kind of just blocking like me from the rest of the room. Like it'd be nice if the microphone was like where the coffee is and just point it up. Also because
Walk around and talk like
Richard Dawson.
Except you've got the
you
snake.
get right up on the
your
thing, so you get nice selectivity. Beautiful sound quality for the recording.
I mean, it's a Behringer microphone and a Behringer mixer, and probably Renault Yorkvilles.
I think my dad is drunk tweeting me. This is weird.
Electro voice. For anyone keeping track.
I'm sorry, drunk texting. I'm getting weird texts from my dad right now.
Is it drunk or is it drugs?
I don't know, but he's probably working in the con store, so I am worried. I have concerns. I need an adult.
Don't let your parents
Escalate
take drugs
quickly.
while they're working the con store. First rule. Maybe the fifth rule.
All of the rules.
It's a good rule. I just think we should actually start with something else. Right, well, exploitation begins at home. Good Lord. Treat your customers like family. Exploit them.
There's some strong tension.
All right. I'll pull up my notes here for this panel.
One of these doesn't like that, so it's panel. What are they blowing up? It looks like they're turning on like hydraulic lines or something.
Yeah. Hydraulic
Wow.
pump system and a bunch of bottle jacks.
Yeah. It's just like a switch system for bottle jack.
I guess, yeah.
Oh, these microphones are great.
It's like you're trying to be Darth Vader, but you're the Diet Coke of Darth Vader.
Well, I wasn't trying to be Darth Vader at all. More like, I don't know, Darth Vader's secretary.
Actually, I think as we saw in some of the later Star Wars, the third trilogy movies, like being the assistant to those guys is trash.
Yeah, that's
you know,
not
it's
fun.
worse. Darth Vader was bad enough. And fucking Kylo Ren is just trash as shit every time he gets mildly pissy.
Yeah.
Like, I do not want to be that guy's aide.
But the pay was good. I mean,
No,
I'm sure he's a
it's
hard
not
time
good.
keeping people.
Employee retention drops off when you kill half of your employees.
Early retirement.
Also a good lesson for cons. Don't stress your people out until they, like, quit because they're ill.
Yeah, do not force choke your con staff. Yeah. It's important.
No matter how much some of them deserve it.
This is an after.
Well, there's also, I was going to say on a more serious note, there's also something to be said for training opportunity or coaching opportunities rather. And, you know, if you have someone who's really enthusiastic and you can redirect some of that to positive, did you do something positive? And that's a win for everyone.
In my previous job, we would often refer to that as a pedagogical opportunity. or in more layman's terms, a teaching moment.
At my workplace, we call it coaching. Like my manager would be like, let me give you some coaching on how you just handled that outage.
That is a really nice way of saying you did not do that right.
Well, sometimes it's weird, and we're just BSing up here just because it's not 4 o'clock yet. But something like at my workplace, I learned it's like if you're the on-call engineer and you're working on an outage and you announce like, hey, there's this outage or a degradation of service or whatever, and if you don't say like there's no customer impact, the other managers will assume the worst and blow up your manager's inbox. So my manager was like, please say if there's no customers affected. Please say if no congoers are affected. Hey, the jackhammering stopped, so that's good.
Don't
It's
jinx
waiting
it.
like 2 minutes until the panel actually starts.
Well, I'm going to wait 2 minutes. I'm going to wait another 3 or 4 minutes just for people who want to filter.
We're on
in.
con time anyway.
Oh, people running on FST?
Well, also, they gave us, I asked for an hour, and they actually gave us 80 minutes. So it's 4 p.m. to 5:20, which is kind of nice. And then I'm going to guess the next panel's at 5:30, so.
They seem like they've been doing a lot of the 90-minute
Yeah.
the 90-minute rhythm, but of the 80-minute panel, which is really good for preventing overages.
Yeah, Ash has been doing that. I saw a really cool thing at PhilCon years ago. They had a schedule that was like hour to hour to hour to hour, which you look at that and you're thinking, oh my God, there's like no buffer between the panels. But each panel had like a wall clock, like sitting on the table. And what they did, and they said the wall clock had no hour hand, but it had a minute hand. And then like the last 5 minutes of the hour was shaded red, and then the last 50 to 55 was shaded yellow. So it was just a nice visual indicator of when you should wrap up. It was just it was a really cool
It's kind of
idea.
like the debate clocks.
Well, I never really did debating. I just did a lot of shouting, so I don't know what you're speaking of.
Well, but if you ever watch like the political debates that they televise, sometimes they'll have like.
No,
this,
I try not to. I go to the bar those
it
nights.
was more fun 4 years ago, and not in the last 2 to 3.
No, it was never fun. It was never fun.
Far more fun before the 2016 cycle.
No, it was not. I remember, no, when I was a kid, my parents were like, watch Michael Dukakis, and I'm like, no.
I
it's
grew up in a
officially
little bit of a political junkie family, so like watching the debates is kind of fun. But in any case, what they'll often do is they'll have like a digital clock, and sometimes there will be like a yellow light that shows up, and then there'll be like a red light when they hit their time and stuff like that. So
Like a purple light for, we're gonna like shock you now.
well, and also the fun part is the moderators could. Sometimes the moderators can cut the mics.
Okay, it's 4 o'clock. We'll wait another minute or
Yeah,
two.
sure.
Is it the Oscars or the Emmys that play the Jaws theme when you make your acceptance speech a little too long, a little too wordy, or you touch on the wrong subject that gets the producers upset?
That would be a good topic for the Oscars, since that's a movie thing.
We have, at my employer, I work for a large technology company, we have Lab Week 3 times a year. Basically, you can take a week off your job and just build a side project. And it's like a science fair at the end of the week. And a couple Fridays before is pitch day, and everyone gets a minute. And once you hit a minute, they have a guy with a guitar with an amp off to the side, and he'll start gently strumming, and he'll start going louder and louder.
Oh, that's really funny.
until
It's like the
you stop
Gong Show,
talking.
but
Pretty much. I don't think gongs in a center city office would be such a good idea.
there's a
The
lot of
noise
things wrong
complaints.
with that. Well, you could just have one of the street drummer teams out there, because they complain about those in Chicago all the time.
Really?
Yeah, the guys who are out there drumming on like the 5-gallon buckets.
Yeah, it's not a. We have different problems in Philadelphia.
Well, I mean, we have a lot of other problems in Chicago too. Corruption.
So the corollary would be that at a Furcon, if you go over your allotted time for a panel, a
Squeakers.
fursuiter shows up and just starts doing adorable but otherwise completely annoying things to the panelists until they wrap up.
With a squeaker.
Oh, yes.
That's when you.
That's
know
con horror stories, though.
Yeah, that's a separate panel, which
yeah,
we'll
that's
advertise
That's the
later.
late night panel.
Oh yeah, there is nothing like a squeaker when you have a hangover.
I saw someone choke on a squeaker once. He was like squeaking.
Was it consensual?
No, it was horrifying. Like he was like in the hallway and he was squeaking and he breathed in and you could hear it go. And he's like coughing and squeaking, and then finally manages to spit it out in his fursuit head, and I'm just like,
It's the most adorable chokies.
I was actually getting worried. All right, enough squeaker jokes. That conversation took a weird turn, so let's get started. Welcome to How to Start a Con. This panel it's both meta and it's a chance for those of us who are working this con to be off our feet for an hour. So, Crimson, why don't you tell them who you are?
Sure, I'm Crimson. I go by other names in other contexts, but this will do for here. I am a member of the Dorsai Regulars, which you may know from the people running around in the red vests, and Blackhounds. There's details. I'm also a member of the board of that group, and I have worked conventions in a variety of roles, from AV to reg to hotels to security to like literally anything except advertising. For small cons, like I used to run or be a part of the local science fiction con at my university that I went to. I work for MFF. Often work here, and I work at sort of a variety of sizes.
All right, Olafin, who are you?
Hi, I'm Olafin. I'm a Canadian. So I'm going to apologize a lot. Sorry. I'm Director of Operations for Furry Equinox. I've been doing that for 7-8 years. I kind of lost track. But I've also volunteered and staffed for a couple other cons like MFF. So, yeah, that's most of my experience.
Cool. And I think this is your first time on this panel, so no pressure.
Yep.
No pressure.
What could possibly go wrong?
And I'm in Giza. I've been attending Anthrocon and Furry cons for 20 years now, and I've been staffing them for 19 years, so that's a pretty strong indictment of me right there. And I've done various things from operations to security. I did art show at MFF for a few years, VIP relations, and my full-time job at Anthrocon now is just managing the website and social media, just because of the volume thereof, if anyone who's looked at Twitter. So the way we start this is we kind of got a list of topics that we'd like to talk about, and if each of us went down our list, we would be at it for hours. So
we could have a con about it.
Yeah, they're kind of talking points. There are cons about it.
There
actually.
are. Well, because we
said
said
CLR.
Well, there's also one in Portland that was just a couple weeks
I'm
ago.
familiar with that one.
Con is the one.
Yes.
I know. Well, actually, the DI sent a few people at their request to talk about security stuff.
But to that point, we each have our own different areas of expertise that we talk about, and we'll start with one particular topic, which is how to determine if a con is needed, and then it kind of goes organically from there, and if we get any specific questions or whatnot. So going right into that, you're considering starting a con in your area maybe. How do you make that determination? Is there a need? Like, is there enough people in the area who want to attend a con, who want to have a con, who want to work a con to make it viable? And a couple of ways to bootstrap a con off the top of my head is your con could be a track in another con. That's how Midwest Fur Fest got started. It was the furry track at DuckCon, and it got so popular. It's like, okay, we have the numbers, let's just do our own con. Another way to do it is to do like a one-day picnic, and what is it? No, I was actually thinking of what was the con? Fur Fright, the late Fur Fright. Fur Fright started as a picnic, and like hundreds of people started showing up, and it's like, okay, we've hit that critical mass. And that's also a low-risk way to do it, because there's another con in the Northeast called Furry Picnic, and it gets maybe like 80 people, so that's self-sustaining, but it's like, okay, we don't have enough people to run a con, let's keep doing this picnic.
I will say that like you can run a tiny con on like 100 people is enough to sustain a convention. Not a big one. Obviously, 100 people is a pretty tiny con. Fump Fest is 100 people show up and listen to funny music for a weekend. So don't set your sights. Well, I mean, actually, I would say your key point is if you want to start a con, don't set your sights at Anthrocon and MFF. You could potentially grow there. I have seen cons get bigger than that from quite small, but MagFest being a prime example. But don't. You could easily shoot yourself by attempting to overreach what your market can support.
And just back of the envelope calculation, like 100 people paying each $50, that's what, $5,000 in revenue, and you host a con at a cheap Holiday Inn that will probably get you all the function rooms for the weekend. And
if you sell, like for free, if you sell enough rooms a lot of times.
Yeah, if you fill up the hotel, sometimes they'll do deals for function rooms and whatnot. And if you're just like a cheap Holiday Inn where you can, just do whatever, and even the catering's cheaper there.
Or you don't do catering.
Don't start at a Westin. Don't. It's expensive.
But that's part of it. Like, okay, if you're like, hey, we've got a small gathering that's like at a park regularly, and now we want to kind of move it inside. Don't, know what hotels do, right, and what their markets are, because that's kind of going to drive where you end up. Like, Holiday Inns are cheap and they're small, and they have small quantities of function space unless you get a weird one. Because like hotels have history, so sometimes you'll have a Holiday Inn that used to be like a Courtyard by Marriott, so it has like a weird extra amount of space in it or something.
So what about Canada? Do you guys have picnics? Because it's like
Do they have hotels
there.
in Canada?
How does that work?
I was actually going to add to the earlier thought. One thing that you can consider is if you have a small meet that's already regular, like every season or every summer gathering, start expanding that. Maybe start charging a relatively low, attendance cost. Start learning how to manage your budget. Build your volunteer team. Prove to the prospective attendees that, hey, we have our act together. So when we say it's going to be at this hotel on this date, we mean it, and we're committed to it.
Yeah.
There's actually two other groups in Canada. Floof and Canferins kind of did similar things where they started small, where they're either at a hotel or at a banquet hall for just a day. So they're not, involving the hotel side in their contract, but they will still have all the logistics and infrastructure in place to run the event. As for picnics and everything, Toronto gets like close to 40 C in the summer, so
It's toasty.
yeah.
What's that in Fahrenheit? Can someone tell me?
Very warm.
I don't know what that is in freedom units, but I'm sure you can ask. I'm sure you can ask Siri.
It's like in the 90s or 100. Yeah, it's real toasty.
Yeah, Toronto does get very hot. We do have actually recurring events through a group called Kerfluffle, which I'm also involved with, but way back in the day, Toronto didn't have nearly as much, and it was just one fur meet that happened in the basement of an apartment building for the longest time, and eventually some people said, why don't we start a convention? And then that's how Fernal Equinox kind of started as a discussion between a bunch of people, and it all kind of went from there. But that's kind of more of the how. What the why? Why do you want to start a convention? Is that a question we want to start going into?
It's a great
Ooh,
question.
that's a vague question.
We
can
have
talk
to put
about
it to
that
the
one.
audience, potentially. I mean, yeah, like we talked about this a little bit in terms of knowing what your market is, and I actually kind of hate talking about it from a market perspective, because I feel like you're very close to sort of corporatizing a subculture, which, you know, we don't deserve that, but at the same time, you know, this shit ain't free. So you've got to figure out who's going to show up and how are you going to connect with people who might want to show up at your event. And it's called marketing and market research. So, you know.
Good news is furries are crazy about Twitter.
Furries do love
Yeah,
their
you
Twitter.
tweet fursuit pictures and it's silly, but it's a great way to bootstrap.
Yeah, or if you're a certain convention in Wisconsin, you just talk about Culvers all the time.
What's a Wisconsin?
It's a place that they make cheese.
Yeah, cheese.
Oh, okay, all right. I almost had to go there for training once.
Yeah, I think it's
It's kind
our
of-
version of Saskatchewan.
Oh, okay, all right.
See, I know little Canada. Yeah, what else? So what else did I have on my list here? I mean, I have a lot of things to talk about.
I actually, we could skip ahead a tiny bit, because we talked a little bit about, like, okay, you've got kind of people and you're like, oh, we kind of want to, we want to transition this little fur meet that we've got, which I think is one of the best ways that you could possibly start if you were looking at a con. Just start getting together with your locals, and if it grows, and don't expect too much out of it, but if it's like, it keeps getting bigger and it keeps getting bigger and we need it, it's turning into a con at that point. But one of the things you can do when you're really trying to transition that, or even if you just want to get better at running your meets, go staff events. Like, go apprentice your people to other events to learn the various skills that are involved in running an event, because there's a lot of fairly specialized skills, and like a lot of times you can apply stuff that you know from other stuff, or there's very little that's unique to a furry event versus any other kind of event, other than the heat death, not heat death, but
Cons have a lot in common. I've
Yeah.
staffed anime cons, and science fiction cons, and brony con, and there's a lot of overlap, including in some of the people. I've seen people at brony cons like, wait, weren't you Midwest Fur Fest?
right. And like I was volunteering at a pride race last weekend, and it was literally like, gee, I am hauling heavy things from one side of the race area to another side of the race area, and for an hour, and then I'm standing at a junction in the middle of a bike path and being like, everyone doing this race, go this way, and answering questions. It's like working a fucking security post in the middle of a parade, and
Yep.
PG panel,
Oh.
PG panel.
and, freaking security post in the middle of a parade. Are there any minors in here?
They're,
Well, in any case, they could probably hear me. So,
it's still the middle of the day, come on. It's daylight out.
when has that ever stopped me?
When you're on my panel.
In a previous life, I actually used to be in event production, and then I ended up finishing school and became a chemist. But it was a really good paying summer job, and I learned a heck of a lot of skills. When I started with FE, I was just like, okay, I'm helping out here and there with technical stuff and some AV, and then people realized that I've got a lot of organizational skills and a lot of logistics skills, and all those skills that aren't otherwise unique to just furry events just kind of slotted in really great. So, you definitely want to learn skills from other conventions. I'm trying to remember the name of that blog, but I can't. If I remember it, I'll mention it.
What is it about?
Is something anime and cosplay related. It's almost like convention horror stories, but it's basically don't do these things.
Wow.
It's kind of like a Skippy's
It's like
list.
a what?
Kind of like a Skippy's list. Like Private Skippy is no longer allowed to do these things in the army.
Yeah.
There's actually, now that you mentioned blogs, there's one called Nerd and Tie, and it actually covers, they've actually covered us before. They cover convention news, and it's usually things like, this convention failed, here's why, or something to that effect, or like, this convention didn't file its taxes, which you should absolutely do. But it does cover convention things. And there's another one called, I think it's called File 770, and that's run by like a science fiction fan, but they cover a bunch of cons, they've talked about us even. Yeah, which I was going to say to the point of staffing other cons, it's a great training experience because it's like if you screw up and you're running a con, that might tank the con. If you screw up and you're staffing a con, it's probably not going to tank the con unless it's something really, really epic that you did.
Yep.
And
That's convention horror stories.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll get to those tomorrow night. It's also a good way to meet a lot of friends who are in the convention staffing community, and a lot of us talk to each other, and it's a good way to then recruit. You know, if you work with some people you like, you can say, hey, would you like to come help out with my con?
Yeah, we have definitely done that. Like, actually, MFF got a new art show director last year, and we went to Trish, who's helping out in the art show here, and who has run it at Marcon a bunch of times. We were just like, Trish, please come help us. We know you can do a good job. And she did. So the other nice thing is, even if the folks that you work with at some other con that you're training with, you know, don't come work the event that you're trying to get started, you can still ask them for information and advice. Like, it's a community.
We have
in a community.
We have opinions. We'll share them.
We sure do.
And it's 2019. You've got Telegram. You've got any other number of instant messaging services. If you're trying to get ready for your event and, oh God, something catastrophic happened, people know people, and you can always ask if someone if someone can, you know, figure out how to get you out of this bind.
And if for some reason you don't know anyone directly who has advice, you can probably tweet at most of the convention accounts and just be like, I have questions about this. Can I talk to your person for that?
Oh, I had a thought, and my train of thought derailed.
So that's kind of the how to get the skills.
Yeah.
But what about figuring out more of the marketing side? Dates, locations,
Now,
my God,
dates,
viability.
Dates,
That's a big one.
Yeah, dates for furry cons are tricky because the con space is really, really packed now. Back in the early 2000s, it was like, okay, there's Anthrocon, and there's MFF, and there's Further Confusion, Eurofurence, and that's it. And I remember there was a con that scheduled themselves like 6 weeks away from us in like 2003 or something. They were super apologetic. We're like, we're sorry, we're so close. Like, our venue screwed us. But now 6 weeks is nothing because there's a con every weekend. And the best guidance I can give for a furry con, that's a very packed space at this point, is it's a function of your con size. Like, we try not to have big cons right next to each other. And so the bigger your con, the bigger your geographic reach. If you're doing a picnic, you know, in like California the same weekend as Anthrocon, no one's going to care. No one's going to care. There was actually a con called Anthrocon that started up a few years ago. It was a furry in Utah for furries who couldn't make it to Anthrocon, and their name was a play on Anthrocon. They asked us permission. When we were done laughing, we said, do it, you have our blessing. and then it turned into a small con, and they moved to another part of the year. Yeah. And I think it closed and then changed hands. I think it still exists in some form, but still, it's a neat way that con came about from people who didn't want to go cross-country to another con.
Yeah, and, you know, gosh, there was a weekend not too far back in this year where I think there were 3 furry cons running simultaneously.
Only?
I think there's been conflict between BLSC, FWA, and maybe someone
actually, that's starting to hose up for Squared right now because they had to move their dates because I think FWA moved their dates, and FWA is a big enough draw at this point that it's kind of disruptive to some of the smaller cons, even though Definitely. Like you're talking about the difference between it's not Madison. Where the heck are they?
Milwaukee area, I think.
Yeah, you're talking about the difference between a small local con in Milwaukee and a con that's in Atlanta. And FWA has, I mean, it would be like trying to do First Squared opposite Anthrocon. It's just
They're big, and there's enough overlap in your spaces, but
Yeah.
It would be detrimental.
What you're saying about First Square does remind me, like, if you're the venue you're talking to, it's like there's only this one weekend available and it's going to conflict with another con. Don't be afraid to reach out to that con and be, hey, we're starting up a con, or it's our third year or whatever, and this is the only weekend we have available. Is this going to be a big deal? And often cons are generally really nice about it. You know, if you tell them our venue only has this weekend available, they're not going to be jerks about it. There might even be some opportunities for cross promotion or something. Yeah. And that happened, I think, 3 years ago with Anthrocon New England and First Square. And Anthrocon New England was much smaller, so then they actually pinged First Square, and I believe notes were compared, you know, in terms of attendee demographics. And it's like, is there any overlap between our attendees? And I think I was the sole overlapping attendee because I'd done both cons the prior year, and then both cons have continued to exist and grow.
Mm-hmm. And at least one con did like a thing with Nordic FuzzCon where they were on the same weekend, and obviously, you know, the draw between Europe and North American con is that overlap is a lot smaller than between two North American cons in general. So they did like a teleconference thing where you could like participate with the other.
That's right.
Yeah.
Was that the same one where a bird flew into a window, like a bird fursuiter flew into the window?
What?
And actually not like flew, but like walked into a window and cracked the glass. I think it was Nordic FuzzCon this past year.
Oh, this was before that.
Oh, okay. Sorry, different con.
Wow.
Right.
Like,
So
did they crack it with their beak, or how did that work?
Just like
Like they just
smacked
walked
into it.
into the glass.
Hilarious. But I guess we're kind of getting around ourselves again. But you don't worry too much about overlapping with the dates with somebody else because you can't avoid them at this point. But don't try to know. Okay, we'll do a lot of our people in our hey, if you're starting from Picnic, you already have. You can just poll people like who's going to Anthrocon. All right, well, we should. Okay, half the group that goes to our picnic goes to Anthrocon. Maybe we shouldn't start our event on an Anthrocon adjacent weekend. Like, that's super informal, but that's an easy, first cut on where and when to do the things.
Yeah, in 2019, actually a friend of mine, BT, back up in Canada, was compiling a calendar of all the different events. And he mentioned just this last weekend, his notes said he had 158 convention-sized events. And there are only 52 weekends in a year. And a lot of them... 53?
That's 3 a weekend.
Yeah, and of those 52 weekends, there's some weekends where it's like Christmas or New Year's. You're going to be busy with family or something more important than a furry convention. So, from a market saturation point, you're going to be looking at starting something regional before, you set your heights a little bit higher.
Now, there is some room for some creativity, and Olafin and I were actually having this conversation yesterday. It's like, who does a con on Christmas? And I said, well, actually, and mentioned that a friend of mine is this fur meet for a dozen people at a Denny's every Christmas, and they give each other awful gifts like orange Bud Light, which it exists, and I don't like to think about it. And if they wanted to, they could try and grow that because it was originally for furries who don't want to celebrate Christmas with their families, or their furry significant other is their family or something, and that's potentially something that could grow a little because I'll bet hotels are really cheap around Christmas. Who books events at hotels on Christmas Day?
Corporate events.
Yeah.
Oh God, in Toronto, corporate events. Don't even try.
What, for Christmas?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean Christmas parties and shit?
Yeah.
Sorry, and stuff.
So Christmas parties,
well, I'm
corporate
talking
functions.
Christmas Day.
Oh, Christmas Day. Yeah, Christmas Eve is very saturated. Christmas Day, maybe not so much. But then again, you're also talking about turnover of the room.
New Year's Eve, do not. New Year's Eve is very, very packed.
So actually, MagFest is a prime example of an event that's almost always right after New Year's, and in fact, at times has been so right after New Year's that they had a New Year's Eve party at the event.
Was that the year when, because I was staffing MagFest, we said our attendees drink and they break things, and the hotel said we just won't fix the damage from New Year's Eve and bill everything
It was
to
a
them?
little bit before
That was a gold map party.
Yeah, so there was a James Bond theme. There was a regular James Bond themed New Year's party that would happen, and so when MagFest moved into that hotel, they were just like, we're just not going to fix stuff. It was a few years later that MagFest dates ended up being on top of New Year's Eve, and the Bond party canceled. So MagFest was like, sure, we'll have a MagFest party.
It's interesting. And booze.
MagFest is actually an interesting example of if you're really willing to be fairly flexible, you can get some interesting concessions out of your hotel because they got multiple truckloads worth of money in concessions for several years as a result of being willing to move their dates one time. So it's be flexible, particularly when you're small.
Yeah, negotiation is big, and venue relations are big, and there's a reason why a lot of the Anthrocon senior staff, and like myself, well, we're wearing shirts and ties here, we're dressing professionally, because if you dress professionally when you're interacting with a hotel, they're going to treat you seriously, they'll treat you like business people, and having good relations with the venue can really, really help with things. Like we've had, back when we were in Philadelphia, we're getting a tour of the hotel, and our convention services liaison is showing us around the ballroom, and he's like, that bank of outlets back there, they're not metered, so whatever you plug in, we won't know about and we can't bill you for.
Oh, absolutely. Same at FE. Like all the directors are wearing, suit, shirt, tie, and there are many times where our banquet liaison or our banquet contacts, tell us these little crib notes about the venue, how certain things work, and make our lives a lot easier on planning.
Yeah, I think of that as dressing like the people that you're going to be working with. So a lot of those, that's what they have to dress like on a regular basis. So when you dress like them, you kind of are demonstrating that you're a part of the same group that they are.
It's common ground.
Yeah, it is common. It's basically, you could think of it as camouflage or costume if you really want to, but it is literally, because I've seen this. People will treat me different if I wear my suit out and around versus if I wear, a t-shirt or whatever. So, and people treat you different. So if you're like, I'm going to deal with a bunch of people who work in hotels, what Giza is wearing other than the white mage thing, collared shirt, maybe a tie, possibly a suit jacket, goes a really, really long way towards making them more comfortable with you, taking you more seriously. It's a weird thing, but, it can help a lot, so.
It's a good sign when your hotel your banquet contact, not differentiating the two, your banquet contact says, so what about fursuits? And then they start to get curious. It's like, what is it like to wear one of those? Oh boy! And it's like in a previous life, I used to wear mascot costumes, and then slowly the walls start to break down, and it's like, okay, they're actually curious about it. And you just need to give them that little nudge, and then they're wearing a fursuit.
We had 1 year at the hotel, the AV director of the hotel actually took that Saturday off so he could attend the con because he was a fan of the guest of honor. I was going to say, sorry, I saw you were about to speak. On that note, something the cons I tend to tell hotels is, hey, your hotel badge, your little name badge of your hotel, that's the equivalent of a membership badge. So if you want to walk around and check out the con, feel free. And for cons like Anthrocon, which are largely all ages, we say if you want to bring your kids by, that's no problem, and we'll let them into the dealer's room or see the shows or whatever. And that's just a great way to let them see what the event is like for themselves and build a little goodwill.
And it's basically free. Because most of those people weren't going to buy a badge anyway, so you're not really losing from a budget standpoint. You're not going to lose anything by saying, hey, all of your staff are welcome, but what you do buy is a lot of goodwill out of that.
Yeah, and hotels do talk to each other, so if you're ever looking to move up to a bigger hotel, they'll call the hotel you're at and say, what can you tell us?
Oh, yeah.
Anthrocon, the Westin has actually gotten calls, which were then relayed to us, basically gotten calls from other Westins or other hotels saying, there's this Furry con looking to move here, what can you tell us about them?
And frankly, if you had a good relationship with your prior facility and you're just like, well, I need to move on because we're too big or the facility got torn down, which has happened to both Anthrocon and Technicon. But I walked into my first meeting with the hotel when we were looking at a new facility. It was like, here's my letter of recommendation from the previous facility that we were at. And that's a great way to start that conversation.
So there's something I want to talk about. I have no term for it. I just kind of call it second year syndrome. It's something I noticed.
Sophomore syndrome?
No, second year syndrome.
Same thing.
Yeah. Well, what I've observed, I actually did a spreadsheet a while ago to track this and discovered that the riskiest year for a con is not its first year, but its second year. That the most cons fail either right going into their second year or right after their second con. And one of the things that I've seen that leads to that are issues of burnout relating to the staff, or sometimes poor fits and recruiting staff. You're recruiting potentially from a lot of people, a lot of people who may be friends, but sometimes a situation arises where someone's a great friend, but the work isn't for them. And you will have to fire at least
many thoughts on this.
You will have to fire at least one
So
friend if you are chairing a con.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
I was
Guaranteed.
actually just chatting about this panel with Rama, who is the current chair of MFF, right before this, and it's like, the quip that you could lead this is, if you're thinking about starting a con, don't. And then secondly, if you're really thinking about it, just be prepared to lose sleep, time, money, and friends.
Absolutely on
And
that.
it sucks, to be completely honest. I have some of my best friends. There are days when I hate them and resent their existence because of the nature of our working relationship at the event can be extremely challenging. And I've been back and forth with some people.
And
how well I like them because of how we have to work, and even with all right, we're going to be professional about this. Like, I can be professional with people, but it can still be an experience that destroys a friendship as a result.
I've usually colored the conversations when I recruit people on board, or I get my department heads to recruit people as well. I wrote a little handbook about this as well. When you're recruiting people, explain how I don't want to use the buzzword, but corporate culture is, right? FE at least tends to operate on, we can agree to disagree, we'll build consensus, but once that consensus is built, barring any sort of hold on, I really think this is a terrible, catastrophic idea, we're just going to go with it and see how it goes. And then we'll review it afterwards, and if it didn't work out, okay, let's reformulate and do something different, let's figure out how to make it better. If you go into that conversation, relationship with a volunteer and say there are going to be points where there's disagreement, feel free to speak up, right? If anyone gives you crap for speaking up in a moderated and respectful tone, tell me, because I want to know who's causing disquiet internally, because I totally want to hear all the different divergent opinions.
Conflict resolution is always fun, and there's sometimes you have to wear a little bit of an HR hat, human resources, and there's a motto I heard from a human resources person once saying there's always three sides to a story. There's each person's side and then the truth. So sometimes you're literally having to mediate people and you'll render a decision of some kind that hopefully leaves all parties satisfied. If two staff members are in disagreement about how to do something.
A really good concept or topic to read up on regarding that is something called restorative justice, where if someone feels wronged, how do you get both sides to the table and make both sides feel right? That might be a really terrible explanation, but it's a really good topic to read up on in terms of conflict resolution, especially when you've got different departments who may not see eye to eye. It's a big thing when you've got all these different departments, sometimes with their different agendas, maybe not working in lockstep, and someone doesn't tell someone else something, and two people walk up to the same outlet assuming they can plug in their equipment, and they can't because there's more than 15 amps of draw on that one circuit.
One of the things you might actually consider is that your convention staff, if you start this up, are going to be a community as well. And so while we write a code of conduct for our attendees, it's really worth thinking about setting at least some very basic guidelines about how your staff are going to interact with each other. And I would say that is a thing that you should write down and make sure that everyone sees. And it's not just I think it extends beyond, you're going to be at the event, you've got to abide by the code of conduct while you're there. I think it extends to really helping to set guidelines about how you interact interpersonally. Boundaries are really important. Not respecting boundaries is a place that you get a lot of burnout from people. I'm speaking very strongly from experience here, where it's hi, my role is a thing that leaves me in 365 days a year, I'm kind of on call if something breaks, and that's terrible. That's kind of two issues there, which is really setting boundaries for yourself as a con staffer, but also as managing the community that is the people who are working on your event, of all right, well, let's set some standards, and then let's actually hold people to them, because that's the other part. You write it down, but if you don't walk that walk, you're going to end up with a toxic group of people, and you're going to drive away a lot of folks, and then you're going to have a crappy con as a result.
And in regards to setting those boundaries, one of the critical things that I've seen now for 3 different events who fortunately have survived these rocky water, whatever. It's
right.
My terrible attempt to tie it into the theme.
Is that a Canadian joke that I'm just not?
Whatever.
I'm not getting.
Anyway.
Sorry you didn't get that.
When you set up whatever kind of board or leadership structure, have a way to keep everyone accountable and base it on building consensus, because eventually someone's going to disagree hard. And I've seen now for 2 of those 3 events where fortunately they made it through everything. A lot of the keys to the kingdom, the website, the bank accounts, legal contacts were personal setup, not
never do
organization.
That.
Don't do that.
The first thing you should do is get some kind of a small organization together to actually start owning those assets.
Yes.
Because even when things are going okay, it's still super unpleasant. Find the right word there, but it's super unpleasant when it's like, oh, well, this is in one person's name, and then we're trying to, just transition away from them having to do that or whatever. Like, create an organization, get it registered as a legal entity of some kind.
Please do.
Like, so many reasons to do that, and it doesn't really matter what your stack text. Don't say that it doesn't matter. There are a lot of valid options for tax status for your organization. There's there's in the U.S. at least, you've got a C7, which is a social club, which I think is how Anthrocon.
Anthrocon, a lot of furry cons are C7.
Yeah, a lot of events are C7s. MFF is a C3. MagFest is a C3, which is a non-profit educational thing. But you can also you can run a con for profit. People do that too. Some of them run through LLCs, but it's like it protects you, the people who are doing it. It also means that you can trade people out a lot more readily, because it's just like, these are the new officers of the board, and these are the people who have access to the bank account. It's 10 times easier to operate your event or even your club. Again, speaking from the DI perspective, our life got a lot easier just when we finally got our C7 status organized, and hey, now it's a group asset for the website or the domain name or the bank account.
It also makes liability insurance, getting that a thing.
And it's not easy.
No, well, it's never easy.
Well, and as events, it's also hard because you don't have hard assets for them to own as readily.
Well, you could still be sued for a lot of.
Oh, sure.
Though.
No, I just mean that at least from what I was hearing, it could be challenging to be like, oh, what are we going to sort of balance your insurance against? And like, well, we don't have a building for you to take.
Yeah.
So
the big thing for us with liability insurance has been if something happens, if an attendee gets litigious, we can just call them up and be like, hey, we received this threat, and your liability insurance will literally tap like one of their law firms on retainer on the shoulder and be like, can you write a letter of response? Also, should things ever proceed to litigation, again, they got you covered for that, and your liability insurance company, this is what they do for a living, so they know the whole process, and that's partly what you're paying them for. What is it also?
You probably should, as you're forming your event, talk to a lawyer. It's going to be a few $100, but you know what?
It will be the best $200 an hour conversation you ever have, because they want you to succeed.
And
they don't want to be associated with failure. A lawyer doesn't want that.
The other thing that liability insurance helps you deal with is there's a legal term called subrogation, which is the legal transfer of a right to sue. And the way that works is, let's say an attendee breaks their leg on the main stage and they have health insurance. Their health insurance pays their bill and makes them whole. But their health insurance is an insurance company. Insurance companies hate paying out claims. So anytime there's a claim, they go, how can we recover these costs? So that insurance company would file a claim against the DLCC's insurance company. DLCC's insurance company doesn't want to pay out a claim either. So they say, oh, was this at an event? Oh, it was at Anthrocon. So then we'll go tap them on the shoulder. And if Anthrocon then has liability insurance, it's just insurance companies talking to each other. And there's very little involvement for you, and there's therefore very little stress for you. So having liability insurance is a huge, just a huge stress reduction thing, because should something happen, you're covered.
Have an organization set up as well, because in some cases it's the only way to play at the table. Sometimes businesses don't want to talk to individuals, they want to talk to a business, even if it's a one-person business on paper.
LLCs.
Whether you're trying to do like an AV rental, and sometimes they'll either say, you know, okay, you're a first-time renter, you know, you're going to do cash up front, but in the future we're going to talk credit terms anyways, because that's how the rest of our systems are set up. This was FE actually. You don't want to try and do that as an individual, because credit terms, what are you going to put that against?
Right.
Your home?
And some people do. Like, a lot over
This
the
might be a good segue to
years,
that.
but It's what? Who?
This might be a good segue to the finances.
Yeah, we don't recommend that.
No, it has been done. It's a terrible idea, but it has been done. It's how a lot of people, like, one of the nice things is as the community, particularly in the furry crowd, has grown, we've got more and more people who are like, maybe we shouldn't do this, and have had the time from, you know, learning from other communities or building up their own events that we can finally go, you really and truly shouldn't do this.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense to incorporate. And on the subject of nonprofits, an interesting aspect of nonprofits is their annual tax form is called the IRS 990. And by law, at least here in the U.S., 990 is a public document, which means there's transparency into like this con's finances, any other con that's a 501c3 or C7. So people, you can like go to GuideStar and you can just pull a con's tax returns and see, you know, what's the revenue, what's the expenses, are they paying salaries, which this con pays $0 in salaries. So
That said, you can also operate, like, this is on a scale that your first con is not going to be, but you can operate nonprofits that pay salaries, even as an event. MagFest is another example. They have 4, 5, 6 people on a handful.
It fluctuates on a daily basis.
It does, but like they run enough events and they operate at a scale where they really do need a handful of full-time staff.
yeah,
And
MagFest, how many events do they run now?
4, 5.
Wow. Yeah, so that is a full-time.
Green, Fall, West, and then the offshoots and the travels. So
Right,
6.
and they did away with labs, thankfully.
Wow. Hiatus.
Well, it's not running this year, so.
But yeah, some of those responsibilities absolutely can become full-time jobs, and then now you may have to look at lifestyle changes. So like myself, I'm a full-time software engineer. I can't work 2 full-time jobs, but you know, maybe if you normally work part-time because you know you're an artist or a writer or whatever, that becomes more of an option. But at least in the furry con event space, I'd say that is the exception and not the rule.
Oh yeah, that's super rare.
So
I don't know of any furry cons that actually pay people unless they're a for-profit event.
Right.
And there's a couple of those kicking around. So.
yeah, but I'm not aware of any nonprofits. Ooh, I should grab a bunch of nonprofit tax returns and do data analytics sometimes.
There you go.
That'll be fun. So we've been talking up here for
40 minutes.
42 minutes. I think we could take some questions, or if there's any topics you'd like us to cover that we haven't covered already, we could talk maybe a little more about like finance or venue relations or that sort of thing, safety and liability.
Finding your first hotel.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, somebody asked us about a couple of years ago.
There's always Holmes Briscoe. You can work with them for a while, and then it's like the deal with the devil that you suddenly want to undo.
Is that
Tell
one
us-
of the
wait.
negotiating companies?
Tell us about them.
Yeah.
Wait, so you guys dealt with Holmes Briscoe?
Never heard of them.
Okay, it may just be a Canadian company, but Helms Briscoe, abbreviated HB, they deal with, they're basically the middleman. They will farm out your event proposal to different venues and say, hey, can you please bid on this event? And they'll say, okay, this is what we'll offer. They handle all of that heavy lifting, and they take a cut of the, typically the hotel room night revenue on a per room night basis. Also, tangent, for those of you who don't know how hotel blocks work, usually it's set up that you have a requirement, it's called attrition, where you as an event need to bring X number of total room nights. So it could be 100 people on 3 days for 300 room nights, or it can be 300 people on 1 night for 300 room nights, right? That's how the math works out. And you have to make that minimum amount, otherwise they charge you a lot more money for something else. And that's a very important thing about hotel contracts.
As much as you can avoid attrition in your contracts. It can be done, but it's hard.
Yeah, it's actually a decent way of getting your foot in the door with something that you couldn't otherwise afford, so long as you know you can make that attrition level. But anyways, Helms Briscoe, they're the middlemen. They'll take your proposal and farm it out to different people, different venues, but sometimes they're a little out of touch with reality. Sometimes they will be a little bit too excited to get what is effectively free revenue. Once you get to a certain size, you want to start taking on that responsibility for negotiating with your venue. Build the relation with your venue and don't just rely on that middle person to deal with it for you, because then to the venue, you're no one.
Yeah,
right?
And so MFF has actually been approached by organizations of a similar nature.
Okay.
Because of course everyone, there's money in that, and so they would like to have that. And there are times when it's tempting because negotiating your hotel contracts, particularly once your event gets to a size where you're like
Your captive market.
6+ hotels, as you guys would know, it's every one of those things is another contract that you have to keep tabs on. So it's tempting to try and farm that out, but again, they're gonna start taking a cut somehow or another, and the cuts that you give up for that can be kind of nice. Like we get, MFF gets good terms on some of its attrition stuff, or you get good. Another really common one is if you sell X number of rooms, you'll get a certain number of room nights. Comped to your master bill, which is where a lot of cons use the crap out of that. That pays for guest rooms and other sorts of things. So
When
you could potentially lose that if you use a middleman event, because they might take that.
Right, when you get big enough, I think with the Westin, it's either every 50 or 100 room nights. So here's a room night credit, and it's on a use it or lose it basis. So we end up with a bunch of room nights during the con, and what we usually do is give those to some of the staff. And it's like, okay, you're in a staff hotel room, which is great because it reduces burden on staff who are, in return, volunteering their time for the con.
18-hour days when you're on AV.
Now, on the subject of not
AVs were rough.
On the subject of not using companies, I remember when I was running Dorsai Thing the one year, which is it's the Dorsai Irregulars, private get-together every year.
Annual business meeting.
Yes, well, and business meeting.
We have to have an annual business meeting because we're Z7.
And when I was checking out hotels in the Philadelphia area, I just went to Google, looked for hotels, just made a spreadsheet, and it's like hotel location, number of rooms, and then I tried to dig up catering prices online, things like that I could without talking to them. So like the Westin Hotel, for example, if you cater a meal at the Westin, it's about $50 a plate. It is expensive, but Holiday Inn is about $16 a plate.
Yes, but it's also Holiday Inn catering.
It's also affordable.
Well, yeah,
That's fine for a small event. Yeah.
Just one more comment about these third-party organizations that do contract negotiation as their core competency. They're also in a bit of a perverse incentive to not think outside the box, because their revenue comes from a higher hotel bill, for the attendees. They take a cut of the proceeds. So if they need a certain dollar value, there's a lot of potential room for you as an event to negotiate directly with your venue and say, yeah, you were charging $200, just pulling numbers out of thin air, and Helms Briscoe was taking 15% of that. Why don't we, find somewhere in the middle to meet and just take Helms Briscoe out of the picture, right? Then that's 12, 15% that they're not taking. And these aren't real numbers. I don't even know what the numbers, because they're so many years ago.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it also, again, having a direct relationship with your hotel can, if it's a good one, can often lead to all right, so we need you're in a professional relationship with your hotel. You're a tiny bit advertisers, and you're a tiny bit all pulling in the same direction, because they're going to be answering to their corporate whatever, because you're basically
sales targets.
Yeah, and sometimes that can be really beneficial, because sometimes your event coordinator is a little light on their quarterly target and really wants to get your contract out the door and might not read it or negotiate it as aggressively as they would other times. And sometimes it can be all right, we've got these pressures on us, let's work together to find an amenable solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Read the contract. I know a con signed a hotel contract once where it said towards the bottom, there is a 20% service charge on all of the above items. So everything had a 20% service charge on it, and the con had a rather large bill.
Even moving chairs?
it was a 20% service charge on everything.
And then the organizers didn't read the contract.
Something like that.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so that was a expensive year for that con.
Yeah, also a good use of a lawyer.
Absolutely. Feel free to reach out to Boozy if you're like, hey, I'm starting a con and I'm in this state. He can at least point you in the right direction.
It's good job throwing him under that bus too.
Yeah. Oh, it's not the first time today I did that.
I'm not surprised. He's a lawyer. He's used to it.
Something I want to talk about briefly is sometimes things don't work out, and you may have to make the decision of can we continue? Can we continue to pull in revenue to pay for the expenses? And I actually want to hold up Pineford Con as a really good example. They made a difficult choice about a month ago. I'd attended the con up in Portland, Maine, both years it ran. It was actually my favorite small con. I love the con. I love Portland. I love their beer breweries. It's just everything I liked about it. Pineford Con made the decision. They said, we're just not bringing enough revenue to pay our bills. And if we do a third year, we're going to owe even more money, and it's just something we can't continue. So they basically made a tweet and said, thanks for coming the last 2 years, but we can't keep doing this. Thank you for the memories, and we'll see you around. So they quietly closed down. And they did the responsible thing. I've seen sometimes a con will try to keep going. And
Yeah, don't go past that point.
yeah, it usually doesn't end well, and I'll say those stories for con horror stories.
And there's sort of a concept there that runs through it as a graceful exit is better than a crash and burn, and that's true if on a personal level versus or in addition to on an event level. So it's like the thing that you want to emphasize with yourself or your staff is that it's much better to speak up and say I have a problem with this, or I can't sustain this. It's far, 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 far better to go, I can't sustain this, I'm sorry, I have to leave, and walk away as early as you know that that's the case than it is to not say anything and then let it crash and burn. And the same thing happens, at the event times.
That goes to burnout as well. Self-care, definitely pay attention to how you're feeling, how your stress levels are,
How much you resent the event for existing.
how many physical symptoms you may have.
God.
That happened to me once at a con, and I said after the con, okay, I need to cut back on my responsibilities, and because I was having some issues sleeping and issues eating, and that was not a fun weekend. So I simply said, I have to do less, and it was okay because someone else then stepped in to do what I was doing. And it's okay to say that. Just try to say it as early as possible, and
tell people that you can't do it. And even if you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure I can do this, and then later you're like, nope, it's not going to happen. Be honest with yourself, and then be honest with the people that you're working with, because it is 10 times better to be like, oh, we've got 6 months to replace this person. We'll figure it out. Or we'll figure out how to reduce our reliance on what they were doing.
Yeah, it'll help. And no one will give you grief for that.
And if
People
they
will respect you for doing that.
If they do, you don't need to deal with those people.
You wouldn't have wanted to work for them for much longer anyways at that point.
Right. And yeah, you want to avoid, I realize I'm obsessing about these cables.
Yeah,
You're going to turn it into a braid, or you're untangling
I'm
it.
debraiding it.
You're
I'm
okay.
debraiding it because it bothered me.
You got some strange interests, Crimson. I just want to say that.
It's not OCD, it's CDO. Put the letters in the right order. You're welcome.
Yeah, in any case, that kind of stems back to okay, if there's people who are going to give you crap about stepping away because there's people who are going to give you crap for stepping away from the event for any reason at all, whether you're just like, it's not fun anymore, or I look in the mirror and I see physical degradation in myself. You don't need to be around those people. This is a freaking volunteer effort, and it's your life. You are going to probably take time off of your life from the stress that's involved in running an event, no matter what. But you certainly shouldn't say, "Oh, I feel like I have to do this because no one." I've been wrestling with this one this year. I don't think anyone else can do this stuff. I don't think we have anyone else for it. Do you know what? So hell what? You still got to live the life that you have, and you shouldn't let con running damage that.
I'll quote Jurassic Park and say, life finds a way.
Cons find a way.
But,
Or they don't.
Similar...
At the end of the day, maybe the con goes down as a result of it, but that's not the end of the world.
One of my preferred strategies when embarking on any kind of project or really anything that involves a lot of planning and execution. Figure out what your exit strategy and exit criteria are. Figure out what your milestones are. If you want to be a certain size by a certain point, and if you can't make that happen, that's when you trigger that conversation and say, do we feel we can still do this? Do we feel we're going to make that positive revenue? Most cons aren't going to be revenue positive for at least a year or two. If you say we can't make a certain growth curve to make that financial target from day zero, before the con even has an attendee stepping in the door, it makes it a lot easier to have that objective discussion. So you're not, you haven't fallen in love with the outcome, and you're just trying to find a way to keep it alive. It is a little bit cold or medical to think of it that way, but just from a project management standpoint, if you overextend, but you have that exit criteria set in advance, it's easier to just take a step back and say, okay, 3 years ago we said we would make X number of attendees by this year. We haven't. Why is that? Is there any major cause that we can find that's an easy, oh, hey, maybe let's just change our dates to not overlap with, a top 10 convention. Then it might be worth it continuing that discussion. But if there's no clear path forward, then you already have your criteria set, and you can say, with a clean conscience, you've given it all the forethought. You had that discussion 3 years in advance.
It's knowing what your limits are before you walk into this thing, because you're going to be tempted. You're going to be emotionally tempted to try and figure out how to make it work. Because once you get invested, you're like, I got to keep going.
So, speaking of keep it going, we in theory have until 5:20. It's now 5:05. Are any other topics you would like us to talk about, or any questions that anyone has? Yes.
So I've been running some events, but I've always been planning trying to break even, not make money. I always found that I always lose money. And then I got a little method where, okay, I plan the prices, that if I sell like 80% of my tickets, I want to at least break even. Is there any kind of math that you guys do for conventions where you sell X amount of tickets, where you, if you can't sell 100% of your tickets, but you want to break even, not the 100%.
So on a high level, well, so I was going to mention for Anthrocon.
Sure. I was going to talk about MFF and DI thing.
Okay, so for Anthrocon, what we try to do for overall budgeting is we've been fortunate that not just Anthrocon, but the furry community as a whole has been growing. So every year we've had year after year growth. So what we do when we calculate our budget is we base our budget on the previous year's revenue. So if 1 year, your previous year, you sold 5,000 memberships, and there's obviously distribution between sponsors and super sponsors and dealers and attendees, and that brings in X amount of revenue. That is your budget for the following year. And if you sell 6,000 memberships, now you made a profit. And at least in the state of PA, if you make some profit, they're not going to go bonkers. One of the interesting things to that point, which I forgot to mention earlier regarding salaries, is every state does this differently, but in PA several years ago we got a note from the PA Department of Revenue saying, hi, we're going to audit you, and we went and we talked to our accountant, and he said, do you pay salaries? And we said no, and he said, so fill out this paperwork, put in reasonable numbers for what the value of your physical assets are, and you're done. And it turned out in our case the state does not care that much if you don't pay salaries. So, but sorry, that was a long-winded answer to your question.
Well, so certainly from a C3 perspective, you're allowed to take in more money from an event and even sustain a reasonable cash pool as a result of that. So in fact, in MFF's case, the target is something like, the nominal target is at this point something like 150% of the cost of an event to have in the bank functionally. Because basically, particularly for MFF, it's in Chicago in December, and that's winter, functionally, whether or not the calendar says it.
And literally.
And literally, because certainly any of us who were at MFF 2 years ago got snowed on. It was great. It was super cool for the fursuiters, but, all you need is a poorly timed blizzard, and suddenly your event doesn't show up, and you need to be able to survive those sorts of things. So it's okay for your non-profit event to
turn a profit, because the real thing is that it's not enriching any one person, which is, I think, most of the thing that they're going for.
That's the thing. I have a lot of people who will complain, "Oh, you better not make any money on it."
Well, so here's the cool part. If you're also running this as part of an organization that has an established tax status, it's a lot easier to go, I'm not making any money. The organization is putting away a reserve in case of, negative outcomes or whatever. So
you can be like, look at my tax returns. Here you go. They're public, and those are filed under penalty of perjury.
I started a ledger on my website so people will see all my public.
That's a great idea.
That's a very good way to be open about that. MFF a few years ago, when they were moving into starting to really and seriously occupy the convention center, budgeted for 0% growth. Same people as last year. Now, MFF's growth numbers have suggested that that's actually a very conservative estimate. Yeah, the growth curve at MFF has been very solid, and a lot of years the budgeting will actually include a certain amount of it's reasonable to anticipate we're going to have this much growth, so we're going to target a little less than that, and it's pretty safe. But if we're taking a risk with something that might change it or might just blow up the costs, then you get more conservative about it, and you have a reserve. Like, that event's been around long enough; it actually has a reserve, and there's been a strong effort among the leadership, particularly recently, to grow that because you want to be able to absorb things. For Thing, we basically said, and so for targeting for very small events, it's more like, these are our costs. I have a reasonable expectation 80 people are going to show up. What is the reg price going to have to be to cover this cost with this many people? And that's the number that you set. And you maybe target it a little bit conservatively, but you don't want to do too much because that drives your prices up. And
I found setting the ticket prices, if I sold all 100% tickets to what it cost me to run the event, there's always hidden costs that happen.
Well, and that's
service charges.
Service charges, or, oh my God, this thing happened. All right, well, throw $100 at it and make more food show up. Actually, food planning is a really great way to run your costs up.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of ways to run through that. We could probably have an entire panel on banquet planning at events, and it would be very interesting to a small number of people.
In FE's case, I actually pulled up our budget document from the last con cycle. So it's our full budget document, not one that we publish internally. That's got all the general ledger or GL codes for each cost center, accounting nerding. Anyways, we had budget on an 85% of last year, so not even accounting for any growth. And we do keep a reserve for the rainy day. We run in March. Weather might one day kick us in the ass hardcore.
Lousy March weather.
Yeah. If the weather hits us really hard, we may have a massive, hotel attrition bill, so we have to be prepared to pay that. It's not a situation where you are making money and you are benefiting personally if you keep a reserve fund and if you are cash flow positive, because it's not just a matter of profit or revenue. Cash flow is important. Even if you get your tax, I don't know about U.S. tax structure, but at least for FE, we're a registered nonprofit organization in Ontario, which means that our taxes get refunded at the end of the tax cycle. We don't get that money right away. We still have to pay taxes when we buy a roll of tape or a piece of equipment, but we get that back eventually. We still need that cash flow to, not be negative.
You gotta get there. And actually, that's another good point. Sometimes venues, particularly larger venues like convention centers, may want you to pay some part of it up front. And hey, if you're a small event, that might come out of somebody's pocket, which sucks.
Speaking of spreadsheets, because it sounds like you're struggling with how to price things and whatnot. What I actually did when I ran Dorsai Thing the one year was Dorsai Thing. It's basically in the host city each year, so it moves around. It'd never been done in Philadelphia before, and I'm like, I don't know what to expect. So what I ended up doing was I made a spreadsheet, and I did a two-dimensional graph where it was the one axis was number of attendees, and the other axis was what's the price I would charge. And then so it's I had 10 values on each axis, and I just have the spreadsheet do the math, and then I could just kind of look at this and eyeball what the revenue would be across different membership costs and different number of attendees. I could kind of start to see what the patterns were and go, okay, so I should probably have a budget of this, and I eventually selected I said, okay, I'm going to plan like 60 attendees or something, and I'll charge this, and I'll have this much revenue. And then I kept an eye on the number of registrations coming in, and when I hit that number, I was like, yay! So
You don't have to sell a kidney.
Yeah, so no
Always
kidneys were
happens
sold.
on the last
No,
day you sell all the tickets.
yeah, no kidneys were sold. Oh, for pre-reg, absolutely. Like when you close pre-reg, you will see a huge spike. But spreadsheets are definitely your friend. They're great for just
Oh, yeah, I got
playing
a lot of
around with numbers and doing what ifs and that sort of thing.
Especially different breakdowns of different prices,
Yes.
depending on your event structure. If you've got early bird, regular, and at event pricing, with your day pass values, with sponsor, super sponsor, and regular attendance values, suddenly you're talking about, n-dimensional calculations to try and figure out all these different hypothetical scenarios. One thing I was going to add is, I don't know what your background is, but just in general, if you're embarking on trying to start an event, it may not be a bad idea to take a free fundamentals of business course. I did. By background, I'm a process chemist. I moved into supply chain recently, but I'm a process chemist. I, put stuff in glass bottles and heat them up, and drugs come out the other end. Legal ones. Pharma.
Whoa, calm down there, Walter White.
I ran the numbers on that, and it wasn't profitable enough for me. But anyways, Coursera is a good free e-learning website or service where you can take some pretty hefty either pre-MBA or MBA track courses. You can take them for free so long as you don't come up with a certificate. So basically you can audit the course. And I did a fundamentals of business accounting. I did an operations management course and a couple others for free. So that's totally something you should also leverage if you're trying to think about bigger picture how you manage the business from a numbers perspective, not just a operational or negotiation perspective.
I'm actually writing that one down.
Yeah,
that's
that's
a good
really
one.
cool.
Coursera.
Coursera, and there's another one.
Khan Academy?
Yes, that's the one.
That sounds neat. One of the things to think about is I would say, generally speaking, that furry cons are very prone to underpricing themselves. Not everyone agrees with me on this. They're wrong. The problem is that when you go to a professional conference, okay, I'm a software developer. If I go to an AWS conference, it might be free, but I know what those things cost. If you look at the ticket values to a lot of pro cons, and then you start being like, oh, they want $2,500 for a 3-day course. Whew.
Good thing Work's paying for that.
Yeah, right. But it's expensive to run these events, and $50 a head is cheap. And the other thing to think about is, what are the cost centers for an attendee? When you're looking at your pricing, okay, you charge $50, and people might say, but you shouldn't charge more than that. And you're like, but my hotel rates are $150 a night. That's 3 badges a night. So what is the actual cost center for people showing up? It's probably not going to be, I made it $60 this year instead of $50. You gotta be, find the sweet spot on how you change that stuff. But fighting it's gotta be cheap, you spend that much money on a freaking meal here.
There is something to be said for also seeing what other players in the same space do. Because if you're charging $100 for an attending membership and know what their con is, there's going to be an impact.
You've got to be able to justify that.
It can be challenging. I knew someone some years ago, he was in the planning stages for a con, and he wanted to charge $300 for memberships, and he wanted to be what he called a premium convention experience. And there was actually pushback in the town he was trying to do from that. People were just saying, $300 is too much, I'm not going to pay it, I'm not going to pay it. There was just a sticker shock, and it never really got off the ground. And even if it was value for that money, people just didn't want to pay that money. So.
Yeah, it can be tough. For small events, you probably don't need to charge $100 a head to get in, but you should really think about what do my costs need to be, and let's be honest about it, and not just, well, I want to keep it cheap for people who are showing up. If they're getting hotel rooms, probably the cost of a membership for any sort of fan type event, whether it's science fiction or fantasy or furry or gaming, the membership cost is probably not going to be the primary cost driver.
Mine are outings where I rent trolleys and things.
Yeah,
I have a big upfront cost of $2,000 to rent these things.
Cash flow.
Yeah, but
there you can be very transparent about it. Like a trolley has 35 seats on it, and so
I
it
have
costs.
limited seating.
Yeah, so it's got X numbers of these, and then you can also say like, if I need another freaking trolley, that's another $2,000.
No more than 2.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like it's not a smooth linear thing. It's a step function for a lot of this, where it's like it costs X amount for one trolley and X amount, which is awfully similar for the second one, and so like you can be like, this is how the pricing works. You can be transparent about it. It's not going to convince everyone, but if you're being transparent about it, at least help you be honest with yourself.
Differentiation is a great thing to do,
Yeah.
which
Yes.
that varies by like locale and location and jurisdiction and laws and all that. And to give you an example, when Furry Connection North started, regular memberships were something like $25. They were really, really inexpensive. But where they got you was if you bought a sponsor membership for $50, you got free beer.
Good beer,
The
too.
sponsor
Yeah,
lounge
taste.
had kegs of local beer, and like the liquor laws in that jurisdiction, allow that. You restrict it to people 21 and over, and you can drink beer. So they just sold a stupid number of sponsorships, and
Yep.
MFF with their sponsor banquet as well. You
Yeah.
guys make a killing with that. Like you had like 1,000 sponsors last year.
We have a lot of people, but we spend a lot of that money.
Right, but your city, and an example, Chicago, the catering is a little cheaper than in Pittsburgh because Pittsburgh's a little more tighter with the union control.
Well, it's in Rosemont there, which is a little bit different. Actually, Rosemont is a very interesting city to work in just because it wants to be Chicago real bad, and it knows it's not Chicago. So it's got a real
Inferiority.
it's got a serious inferiority complex, and it really crops up in the way that they operate their businesses.
And
But
real quick, I see some people like, I saw you walking. Are you here for the next panel? We're not running over, are we?
I think
that's his camera.
I think he's
Oh,
checking
okay.
on his camera. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
It's been running the whole time.
oh no. But
We're going to be on the internet. Oh no.
yeah, you can find ways to make it worth it to people. Sometimes it's, hey, you've got one of the best ones is you don't have to stand in the same line as everyone else, and whether that's to pick up your badge or it's to get into an event, that is a selling point. It's actually why I got a sponsor membership this year. I was like, I'm not gonna
that's
work, and then I'm just like, if I'm gonna pick up my badge, I'm gonna go to the short line because it's not that much of an upcharge.
Fair enough.
It gets you into stuff like there's a reception that you have to be a sponsor or a staff member to get into, and like those are those little perks, and sometimes those perks don't cost you anything. Reserved seating doesn't really cost you anything other than you've got to manage it, but like a shiny thing that goes in a bag does cost you something. So like you've got or banquets are a prime example. They cost money to run. So
And perks for staff are also a thing. So, and that's a way to get people to staff your events. So, like if you have the budget, staff hotel rooms. In our case, we do a staff dinner on Sunday night. We basically have a catered dinner with the DLCC. All the staff pretty much stop what they're doing, sit down for an hour and have a nice meal, and that's a great benefit for the staff. And the secondary benefit is the DLCC, the venue, they like that they're paying for their catering because venues, their business model is...
They make so much money
Yeah, they
on-
make a
on
lot of
food
money
and
on
beverage.
catering. And if you spend a lot of money on catering, then you get things like cheaper function rooms, and it makes a lot of other aspects easier. So it's something some cons I've worked with over the years, they'll at least get something catered, which would be like a super sponsor luncheon, or like at Anthrocon New England's a super sponsor dinner. Get it catered by the hotel, and that tends to make the hotel pretty happy.
Same at Effie, we've got 2 catered functions, a super sponsor, as well as the the tea social, which is just kind of open to all attendees. It got started by an attendee, but kind of on the note of how to price your event. There are only so many things you can reduce costs on by spending time or human capital on, right? The project manager's triangle is good, fast, cheap, pick 2. You can only have 2 of those. You can never have all 3. Yep. If you do, please tell me how you found it out, because you and I can become millionaires at that point, billionaires. Like they were saying, certain things are either non-monetary, or you can build with time at a lower cost rather than just rubbing your credit card on it. Certain things, you're dealing with businesses who deal with the commodity rate in your area for AV services. Sometimes you have vendor lock-in. A certain venue says, we're only partnered with this one particular AV company. You have to go with their rates no matter what, right? right? Then there's no question of, well, if we got a couple cheap speakers from Craigslist and, spent a lot of time getting everything ready, we could do it for free. Unfortunately, you might get stuck with them. So you have to budget based on that.
In fact, if you try and subvert those, you need to understand what those are, because you will suffer if you try to subvert that stuff. You're like, we're going to cheap out on this. I'm like,
Now, something we discovered at
get burned.
Anthrocon with crunching the numbers is our pipe and drape that we have in the DLCC.
That's gonna be expensive.
Well, we used to rent that, and then we did the numbers and realized that if we bought it, we would, and just used it year after year, after 3 years, we'd be at that break-even point, and we've hit that. So now we're saving a good chunk of change, not having to rent pipe and drape anymore. And I think we have like a pallet jack now to get it out of the storage locker.
It's heavy.
Yeah, stuff's heavy. But there's no actual cost for it. Like the stuff guys just move it around.
Well, I mean, the downside to that is any physical asset that you own for an event becomes it's a risk in a sort of financial sense. Okay, so the pipe and drape doesn't cost you anything now, but you have to have space for it, which means your storage costs have not only your storage requirements are higher than they would be if you weren't renting it, or if you were renting it. If there's a fire in your storage unit, everything in the storage unit, and that pipe and drape, you splash water on it, it's ruined.
We have insurance for that.
Right, but I mean, like, there's all those little things where it's like, and then that's why, as an organization, you carry insurance. But there's a lot of costs that are associated with it, aren't the dollar value of renting it. So it's that, not to argue that point, because that's a very good, like, you need to do this analysis. What's it cost us, and how long do we expect it? Is it a durable good? Can we, welcome to running a business functionally. You get to make those decisions. Is it maybe better for us to rent it because our assets are what they are, or it costs us way too much to store stuff, or our storage budget is not really negotiable and we've got better things to store it, or whatever. Like, sometimes it's better not to own it, sometimes it's better to own it.
Similar example from FE that we're actually in the process of putting the capital expense proposal internally together. We moved to we doubled our floor space, and we found that just because of the architecture of the building, radio coverage sucks.
Yeah.
So we are actually in the process of buying an entire fleet of digital mode radios. We did the cost analysis and found, okay, of all the production rental companies in the Greater Toronto Area, what are their rates, what are their offerings, and we found, with a little bit of extra sleuthing, that of the ones that were in our price range, while they claim to license properly through Industry Canada, they actually don't. So they're in breach of the law, and we really don't want to have anything to do with that. We found it was actually a lot cheaper for us to just do the license application ourselves. Because as a nonprofit, we just say, yeah, we just want to occupy this band for, 5 days.
Oh, you did that too. We also did that.
Yeah, so we're in the process of buying a whole fleet of radios, and the payback effectively is 3 years.
Yeah, we bought radios, and we have an FCC commercial license that I think gives us a frequency for like a 20-mile radius. So that's a similar thing.
And actually, it's an interesting point is the larger your convention gets, the more you'll have to think a lot about what your communication infrastructure becomes.
Telegram.
That's the logistics and operations side too, yeah.
It's pretty interesting when you can ride the cellular data networks, but there are places where that doesn't work very well, or it's the wrong kind of medium. Like in a security environment, we've found traditionally that radios are one of our best tools as long as it is reliable. We have a big problem at Foursquare, the radio system consistently not adequate to the space that it's working in. We've had those problems here, and so how do you build the stuff out? Because sometimes it's still better than trying to type on your phone. I can ask for stuff through voice faster than I can type it out on Telegram, and is somebody going to see it? Is their phone charged? Is there, all of those little things, it's probably best for you to have multiple layers. But you know what? If you're a 100-person con, you probably don't even need a radio set, particularly if it's compact.
So I think we're coming up on time, so I think now's a good time to wrap it up. If you'd like to get in touch with any of us, if you DM Anthrocon, that will go to my phone, and I can provide contact info on Twitter for myself and these guys. The next panel we're doing is a little less boring than this one. That would be the Con Horror Stories panel. That will be tomorrow night at 10 p.m. in DLCC 406. And we will have myself, we will have Olafin, we will have Rama, who's the chair of Midwest Fur Fest, we will have Alkali, and we will have Steve Simmons, who is one of our security people who's worked cons since the 70s. So we all got insanely horrific stories to tell for everyone else's benefit, I guess.
Peanut butter
They're
is
fun
not
war
a costume.
stories for charity.
I've seen the pictures of peanut butter is not a costume. It's terrifying. Oh,
Yeah,
dear.
no, peanut butter is not a costume. That is absolutely true. So thank you everyone for coming, and feel free to reach out if you'd like to chat further.
Yeah, great success in your endeavor in actually starting an event. It's very rewarding when it works.
Silver Gato Man, he bought me a coffee. Silver Gato Man, here is the song for thee. He likes to video all the panels at the cons. You should go and watch them whether they are short or long. Silver Gato Man, you video that's not a jibe. All of you go to his YouTube channel and like and subscribe.